Narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:10 p.m. In a grim, dark, as you might have guessed, sunless, lightless, cheerless city of Budapest. And I just want to know, can people hear me? Because I'm not sure whether is my microphone working. You just signal that you can hear me. Somebody says, "Yeah, I can hear you. You're coming great." Okay, can you hear me? All right, no response, which is not always a good sign. Um, and um, and yep, Robert, can you hear me? Okay. The Muffin Man says the gaggle. That's exactly all right. So I mean, if you can hear me, then that's great. All right, then that's excellent. Anyway, so welcome everybody. It is the time for the yes, we can hear you, says the Muffin Man. So thank you, great. It's time for the Tuesday night live stream. So thank you very much, everybody who has joined me. And there's a few things up to discuss today, and in particular with where we are with Trump, Ukraine, Russia, and of course, above all, with the European Union. Because Trump has given a very lengthy interview to Politico, very interesting interview. So we've had the Trump 28-point plan, and then we had the national security strategy, the new document that was issued a few days ago, and now we have the interview in Politico, where Trump really unleashes on the Europeans. And it's now really very interesting as to where we go from here, because as things stand, we have Carlos says, "Good evening, good and nice to see you, Carlos." So, as it stands, we have the Trump peace plan. We don't quite know exactly. We know the 28-point plan, but we don't know where it's now, um, because we don't exactly know what Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff discussed in the Kremlin last week. So that what document they were referring to. We know that there were 4 documents that were submitted to the Kremlin. And so we don't know the contents of those 4 documents. But we have the Europeans who met yesterday with Zelensky in Downing Street, the E3, that's Macron, Starmer, and Schmerz, and they obviously telling Zelensky not, hey, you got to work with Trump, but telling him, how best to fend Trump off and to keep the thing going. So now they're coming up with their own, the new peace plan, the new peace plan that they intend to submit to Trump either later today or tomorrow. From the newspaper stories, we're told that Zelensky has flatly rejected making any territorial concessions. So that part of the 28-point plan, which was that all Ukrainian forces would be removed from Donetsk and Lugansk, that's already gone. Zelensky flatly rejected, and obviously with the endorsement of the Europeans. So we have Trump really pissed off already with the Europeans, and then the Europeans compound this by having this meeting with Zelensky, and then telling Trump that, oh, we're going to send you along our new revised peace plan, and we basically rejected the ingredients of your plan, and the most important part of which was obviously the withdrawal from Donetsk and Lugansk. Um, so, given that, it's not too surprising that Trump decided absolutely to unleash on the Europeans in this interview with Politico. And it's worth taking a look at it because this is his most ferocious, most vehement attack on Europe to date. I mean, so we had the um, the national security strategy document, which obviously was very harsh on Europe. But now, we thought, okay, well, that was maybe written by Elbridge Colby, but this is really coming from Trump himself. So let's take a look at what he said in this Politico interview. So here's the transcript. It says the Dasha Burns says. Your team has been going back and forth between Putin and Zelensky with various drafts of his peace deal. Which country right now is in the stronger negotiating position? And Trump said, well, there can be no question about it. It's Russia. It's a much bigger country. It's a war that should never have happened. Frankly, it wouldn't have happened if I were president, and it didn't happen for 4 years. Okay, so that's familiar Trumpian talking point. I watched that taking place, and I said, wow, they're going to cause some problems here. And it started, and it could have evolved into World War III. Frankly, I think it's probably not going to be happening now. I think if I were president, you'd have had World War III. I think you would have had a much bigger problem than you have right now. But right now, it's a big problem. And it's a big problem for Europe, and they're not handling it well. So this is now Burns. Last night, you said you weren't sure if President Zelensky was fine with the most recent proposal, that he isn't ready. I was hearing from your advisors around Thanksgiving that they thought this thing might be wrapped up by the end of the holiday, but it's still not done. Is Zelensky responsible for the stalled progress or what's going on there? And then Trump comes back to saying what he said the other day, which was rather odd. He says, well, he's got to read the proposal. He hasn't read it yet. And then Burns says, well, the most recent draft. And then Trump says, that's as of yesterday. Maybe he's read it overnight. It would be nice if he would read it. A lot of people are dying. So it would be really good if he'd read it. His people loved the proposal. They really liked it. His lieutenants, his top people, they liked it. But they said he hasn't read it yet. I think he should find time to read it. So this is classic Trump. He always comes up with these kinds of things like Zelensky hasn't read the proposal, which would sound odd, but suddenly then he keeps repeating it. And then says, oh, well, his people loved it, but Zelensky, he hasn't read it. I don't know what the hell's he doing all day. Traveling around, but he hasn't sat down to read it. But nonetheless, it's a reflection of his exasperation with Zelensky. And so here he says, Burns, is it time for Ukraine to hold an election, do you think? And then Trump said, yeah, I think so. It's been a long time. It hasn't been doing particularly well. I think it's time. I think it's an important time to hold an election. They're using war not to hold an election, but I would think the Ukrainian people should have that choice. And maybe Zelensky would win. I don't know who would win, but they haven't had an election in a long time. They talk about a democracy, but it gets to a point where it's not a democracy anymore. So this is excellent comments from Trump, because, of course, it's now almost 7 years since Zelensky was elected president. And apparently, they have no intention of holding any further elections. And, of course, the media and all the Western policymakers, yeah, well, that's of course because, you can't have an election in wartime. Except, of course, that you can. And, plenty of times in the past, countries have been at war and they've nonetheless held elections. Iraq held elections during the time of the US occupation. South Vietnam had elections during the time of the Vietnam War. South Vietnam had many elections. Afghanistan, during the time of the U.S. Intervention, had elections. So there's no reason at all why you can't have an election. But it just shows how everyone just repeats the mantra, and then it just becomes this familiar talking point. Oh, well, we can't possibly um, to have any elections because there's a war on. And look, look at Britain. Britain didn't have an election. All right, Britain didn't have an election, but that's just an exception. Other countries did. Why should Britain be the norm that not having elections? So here, and then over here, then Trump goes on. Where are we? Yep. And then it says, on Sunday, your son, Don Jr., responded to a reporter's questions about whether you will walk away from Ukraine. And your son said, I think he may. Is that correct? And then Trump says, well, no, it's not correct, but it's not exactly wrong. We have to, they have to play ball. If they don't read agreements, so again, he comes back to this. If they don't read agreements, potential agreements, it's not easy with Russia because Russia has the upper hand, and they always did. They're much bigger, they're much stronger in that sense. I give Ukraine I give the people of Ukraine and the military of Ukraine tremendous credit for the bravery and for the fighting and all of that. But at some point, size will win generally, and this is a massive size. And when you look at the numbers, I mean, the numbers are just crazy. This is not a war that should have happened. This is a war that would have never happened if I were president. So sad. Millions of people are dead. Many soldiers. Last month they had 27,000 soldiers and some people from missiles being. And so, okay. And then Burns chimes in. Well, if Zelensky rejects this deal, is there a timeline? Is there a point at which you say, okay? Trump then says, well, he's going to have to get on the ball and start accepting things. When you're losing, because he's losing, do you think Ukraine has lost this war? And then he says, well, they've lost territory long before I got here. They lost a whole strip of seafront, big seafront. I mean, you look at the maps, I've been here for 10 months, but you go back 10 months and take a look, they've lost the whole strip. It's now a bigger strip, it's a wider strip, but they lost a lot of land, and it's very good land too that they lost. And then Burns go back, well, the resounding consensus in Europe right now is that they want to keep supporting Ukraine until they can win this war, until they drop, yeah. Is that, well, then they should support it. Realistic in your view? I mean, look, then they should support it. I mean, if Europe is, I'm friendly with all of them. I mean, I like all of them. I have no real enemy. I've had a couple of that I don't like over the years. I actually like the current crew. I like them a lot. But and I know them very well. I know them really well. Some are friends, some are okay. I know the good leaders. I know the bad leaders. I know the smart ones. I know the stupid ones. You get some real stupid ones too. But they're not doing a good job. Europe is not doing a good job in many ways. They're not doing a good job. And then it says they talk too much, and they're not producing. We're talking about Ukraine. They talk, but they don't produce. And the war just keeps going on and on. I mean, 4 years now it's been going on long before I got here. This is not my war. This is Joe Biden's war. And in terms of America, it's a very sad thing. And the only reason I really care about it is because I hate to see young, beautiful people being killed. That's largely why I got involved. I mean, if you look at the Congo, Rwanda has been going on, and again, it goes back there. Machetes, and then now, before we get into this whole issue of the nuclear strategy, it's very interesting what he's just said there, because he is essentially throwing down the gauntlet, because he's saying, well, okay, I mean, if you want to continue with this war, if you just simply say, oh, well, we reject the Trump peace plan, they said, okay, well, have at it. I mean, I'm not going to stop you. If you want to keep fighting, then keep fighting. You're not going to win, but you're not going to get anything out of me. And that's really the key. And that's, and I think that all of these discussions, all of these interviews go back to the real issue, which is if Trump, he makes this effort to, come up with a peace plan, and that goes nowhere, then does Trump go away and say, "Well, okay, well, I did what I could. They want to continue fighting, then let them go on fighting, but you're not going to get any intelligence from the United States, and presumably, we're not going to sell you any arms either." Now, he hasn't said that. That's an implication of what he's saying. But he hasn't. But that's the thing. He hasn't said that, so we really don't know what Trump really intends to do. We know that he's feeling exasperated by all of this. What I find surprising, frankly, is how poorly the Europeans have played their hand. I mean, given that Trump wants to, well, it's obvious that Trump wants to end this war. So the best way, and the Europeans want this war to continue, so they want Trump to continue supporting this war effort, so that, they know that. So therefore, what would the Europeans do in order to ensure that Trump continues? Well, the best way to do that is to show that you are interested in Trump's plan. But what has happened when Trump came forward with that plan, the Europeans and the Ukrainians said, "Well, no, flat, no, we don't accept it." Russia did not say that they accept it. They made it easy for Russia, because Russia could then turn around and say, "Yeah, well, there's interesting things in there." But Russia did not say, "Oh, yeah, we accept it." Even though the media have reported, "Oh, Russia, this is a dream come true for Russia. It's a Russian wish list," or anything like that. That's absolutely untrue. It's definitely, that wasn't a plan that Russia would like. There's lots of things in there Russia would absolutely not like, including withdrawal from territories, use of its money for reconstruction of Ukraine. They give up the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. They accept the lines of contact, or freeze along the line of contacts in Kherson and Zaporozhye. So all of these things Russia would not like, but Russia did not reject it, and but the Europeans have, and so Trump has somehow vented his anger and his frustration at the Europeans and at Zelensky. I mean, when he says Zelensky hasn't read the paper, he hasn't read it. I mean, you can say he's getting frustrated, and it's always a very clever move on the part of whoever to suggest that we're ready to accept this plan, even though you're not ready to accept it. But it seems like you're the party that's actually ready to accept. Israel has been the master of doing that. They've always managed to persuade the world that they were ready to accept all kinds of peace plans when they flatly were not ready to accept any peace plans. But they've always been, brilliant at that kind of public relations. You stand back, you say nothing when somebody comes up with a peace plan, and you let your opponents reject it. And so all the opprobrium attaches to your adversaries, because they're the ones who said no to the plan. I mean, a classic case of that, of course, was the United Nations partition plan for Palestine in 1947, which Israel did not accept, but the world always thought Israel had accepted it. The only reason they thought Israel had accepted it was that they didn't come out with a flat rejection in the way that the Arabs did. So therefore, the Arabs got blamed for rejecting the partition plan, but Israel did not accept the partition plan either. So in this way, Russia has not accepted the Trump plan, but Trump is annoyed about the Europeans, because the Europeans have rushed out and said, "Oh, this is completely unacceptable," and now they're putting forward their own plan, and which they're going to be submitting it later today. And here we go on. So here's Burns says, well, your administration just released a new national security strategy that sent shockwaves throughout Europe. The strategy says a key pillar of American foreign policy should be cultivating resistance to Europe's current trajectory within European nations. How much should European leaders prepare for your administration to push to reshape the continent's politics? And Trump, well, Europe is a different place. What do you mean by that? Well, if it keeps going the way it's going, Europe will not be, in my opinion, many of these countries will not be viable countries any longer. Their immigration policy is a disaster. What they're doing with immigration is a disaster. We had a disaster coming, but I was able to stop it. We have no people coming through our borders now, 0, 7 months. I mean, who would believe 0? We went from millions of people to no people. And then that's not what Europe looks like. Yeah, the opposite. Yeah, Europe, they're coming in from all parts of the world, not just the Middle East. They're coming in from the Congo, tremendous number of people coming from the Congo. And even worse, they're coming from prisons of the Congo and many other countries. And for some reason, they want to be politically correct, which actually I think is the opposite of politically correct. But they want to be politically correct, and they don't want to send them back to where they came from. And Europe is, if you look at Paris, it's a much different place. I love Paris. It's a much different place than it was. If you take a look at London, you have a mayor named Khan. He's a horrible mayor. He's an incompetent mayor, but he's a horrible, vicious, disgusting mayor. I think he's done a terrible job. London's a different place. I love London. I love London, and I would hate to see it happen. My roots are in Europe, as you know. So Burns then says, well, how involved are you going to get? I mean, could we see you getting involved in European elections, for example? I want to run the United States. I don't want to run Europe. I'm involved in Europe very much. Burns says, well, might you endorse candidates? And then Trump says, well, NATO calls me daddy. I mean, I have a lot to say about it. Look, I raised, GDP 2% to 5%, familiar to, 2%, now they pay 5%. And they're paying it because when we send things over, NATO pays for it. And I assume they give it to Ukraine. But Europe is being destroyed. And then she again comes up, would you consider getting involved in some of those elections to put in leaders that you think are better suited? Well, I've endorsed people, but I've endorsed people a lot of Europeans don't like. I've endorsed Viktor Orban. I endorsed, going back to South America, Milei. He was losing in the election, and I endorsed him, and he won in a landslide. And then Burns goes, well, yeah, Viktor Orban, beyond endorsing, he recently said that you promised him access to US-backed financial shield worth up to 20 billion. Is that right? No, I didn't promise him that, but he certainly asked for it. But would you consider giving that to him? I think he's doing a very good job in a different sense on immigration. His country's landlocked. He's got a different kind of country. He doesn't have the sea, so he can't have ships coming in with energy. He's got a big pipe coming in from Russia. They've had it for a long time. It's a different situation he's got. So would you consider something financial? So now you can see how he's thinking. I mean, obviously, he's going to be interfering. I mean, he's already done that. And I know a lot of people, oh my God, this interventionism and so on. But the fact is that governments intervene all the time in other countries' elections, which is why the whole Russia hysteria was so ridiculous. Because, first of all, there wasn't really much evidence that Russia was interfering in the 2016 election. But even if Russia was, who cares? I mean, countries intervene in the friends' elections, in their adversaries' elections. This is since time immemorial. I mean, raising your skirts and getting all agitated. Oh, look, Trump is really saying he's going to be intervening in elections in Europe. It's just that Trump makes it um, explicit. He's saying, "Yeah, I'm going to be doing that." And he's already done that. He's already endorsed Orban. He did it before. He did it in the 2022 election, and I guess it was 2018. So the 2018. So he's done it on a regular basis. He's intervened in Hungarian elections, and I would imagine um, the French election, when's the French election? The 2027. So yeah, Trump will still be president then. Yeah, I would imagine he will probably intervene to secure the victory of the national rally. So yeah, I mean it's just one of those things. I can't get really very worked up about it. Um, but it's it's important though to see what Trump's thinking is here, because he is essentially saying to Europe, you've been going on and on and on about this threat you face from Russia. I'm not buying it for 1 minute, and I've never bought it for 1 minute. I said during my first term, um, well, if you're so scared of Russia, why are you buying all this gas from Russia? That was his big thing during his first term. They never had an answer to that because that was still in the days of Nord Stream. He said, why are you buying gas from Russia if you're so scared of Russia? But now they're still doing the whole, oh, we're so scared of Russia. Um, wow. Whenever Marty joins, he's always got some interesting picture to to entertain us. So let me just be, before I go on, let me just take a look at Marty's picture. And from what I can see, this is Hillary Clinton, Madeleine Albright, the Madeleine Albright. I don't know who the third person is. It's probably somebody quite well known, but I don't recognize who that is. She maybe somebody well known, but not a very good picture. Um, and I don't know what is this. What this is, some kind of a human rights conference when they're sitting there and they look as if they're praying or whatever. I mean, Hillary Clinton. I think when was it? She would do that routine when she'd go to these human rights conferences. She says, "Human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights." I can't quite do that flat accent of hers, which is just so grating. But yeah, that's the kind of thing. But this is the hideous Madeleine Albright. But anyway, so the thing was with Trump is he's saying Europe's problems today do not come from Russia. Don't give me this stuff from von der Leyen and Merz and Kaya Kallas. Russia poses a threat to us. He's saying, no, Russia does not pose a threat to you. The threats you face are threats that are internal. And they're internal, then these are issues you haven't addressed. You have an immigration problem, you haven't addressed that problem. And then you have a problem with free speech, and then you're going in absolutely the wrong direction on free speech. You don't like dissent, and your response to dissent is to find ways to suppress free speech, find ways to suppress political parties that you don't like, and movements that you don't like, manipulate elections. That's your response. That's Europe's problem today. That was the remarkable thing in that national security strategy, that he was saying that Europe's problems do not come from abroad. Least of all do they come from Russia. It's because he's saying, look, Russia is much smaller. than Europe is by population. Europe is three times the size of Russia. I mean, by total prosperity and armed forces and whatever, it's bigger than much bigger than Russia. They don't face a threat from Russia, but you do face domestically quite serious threats, and that's kind of what he's saying. That's uh, and on the contrary, and he said this. Oh, so it is about women's rights. Marty says Clinton received the 2013 Lantos Award for her work in the areas of women's rights and internet freedom. So it was about women's rights are human rights, and human rights are women's rights. Lantos is that ghastly creature, Tom Lantos, one of these awful people. He was a Hungarian American, but one of the most insufferable interventionists and using human rights in order to manipulate political outcomes around the world. And of course, he was naturally one of the worst of the "let's bomb the Serbs" characters in the 1990s, and a big advocate of the Albanians and particularly the Kosovo Liberation Army. So he was an all-round bad guy, but he's kind of celebrated as the other woman is Annette Lantos. So I assume she's the widow of Tom. Um, okay, well, all right. That's Lantos Award, yes. Um, and but I remember when he in this was 2008, so I think when no, a little bit before that, he was a big advocate of independent recognizing the independence of Kosovo. He was a big and but he justified it by saying that somehow, well, all the Muslims around the world are going to be absolutely hailing the United States. The United States will be the hero of the Muslim world. He said even jihadis are going to be celebrating America's recognition of the independence of Kosovo. Even jihadis. So he was advocating independence of Kosovo because jihadis are going to be rejoicing over it. So that's entirely fitting that you're getting the Lantos award. So yeah, that's so. So again, when Trump said in that national security strategy is that America's role when it comes to the conflict between Europe and Russia is not to take Europe's side against Russia, which is the traditional staple of these policy documents. Oh, Russia's a big threat. Got to do something about Russia. Europe is our greatest ally. NATO is a great ally. We need to protect Europe from Russia. He said, no. We actually need to stabilize the European continent. We have to make sure that this rift between Europe and Russia does not go out of control. So it's actually, he promises that the United States would be even-handed as between the conflict between Europe and Russia. So that's something to be even-handed between Europe and Russia. Anyway, so he goes on in this Politico interview, having already said, hey, what are the problems in Europe is, hey, you've got uncontrolled migration. And he said, how much he likes Hungary, even though he's saying, we're not going to provide you with a $20 billion backstop. He's already gotten right is the immigration. So this is again Orban, because he allows nobody in his country. And Poland has done a very good job in that respect too. But most European nations, they're decaying. That word has really been resonating today. No one likes being told that they're decaying. Burns, you can imagine some leaders in Europe are a little freaked out by what your posture is, and European No, they should be freaked out by what they're doing to their countries. They're destroying their countries. And well, European Council President, well, this is the insufferable um, Costa, the Antonio Costa, and Trump and the people. Look, they're people I like. This is classic Trump. He always says, "Well, they're people I like. I really like these people. They're all friends of mine." Yeah, right. I get along with them, but you can't let this happen. And it gets to the point where you can't really correct it. There'll be a point, and it's very close to that point. And what will that mean? It will mean that they're no longer going to be strong nations, or they'll be. Does that mean that there won't be allies anymore? Or they'll. Well, it depends. It depends. They'll change their ideology, obviously, because the people coming in have a totally different ideology. But it's going to make them much weaker. They'll be much weaker, and they'll be much different. Your mayor of London, he's a disaster. He's a disaster. He's got a totally different ideology of what he's supposed to have. And he gets elected because so many people have come in. They vote for him now because, it's like, it's one of those things. But I hate what's happened to London and I hate what's happened to Paris. I hate when I see it. Do you think many of them are just weak and you don't really want the allies to be allies with them? I think they're weak, but I also think they want to be so politically correct. They don't. I think they don't know what to do. Europe doesn't know what to do. They don't know what to do on trade either. I mean, I look at a lot of that trade, situations going on there. It's a little bit dangerous, but Europe wants to be politically correct and it makes them weak. It sounds like you want to make some pretty massive changes in Europe. But the important thing here is where this is going. I mean, it's pretty much saying, which we've been waiting for an American president to say for a long time, namely that, what do we need these people for? The direction in which they're going is not a particularly healthy one, and there doesn't seem to be much purpose to it. How, in what way are they making America stronger? And that has never, no one ever bothers to answer that question because, of course, everyone just, oh, Ukraine's in the front line, and we're fighting Russia over there so that we don't have to fight Russia over here. And, this is, if Russia prevails in Ukraine, then Russia will overwhelm Europe. All these nonsensical theories. And, they get by just through sheer inertia, but through, people just keep repeating and repeating and repeating this. And then it simply gets accepted that somehow there's an existential fight for Western civilization taking place against Russia. And then, of course, you have, then somebody will come to power and will see through it. And Trump saw through it. Now, where that goes and whether he'll take it any further, whether he'll be able to implement anything on the basis of that, we don't know. But he clearly says, hey, there's no value added for the United States in maintaining alliances with countries that are unable even to maintain the integrity of their countries. They just allow their own countries to be overrun by migrants. And you think, well, look, that's a very basic thing. I mean, I think you have to control your borders. You have to control who comes in. I mean, particularly when you have very small countries, as the European countries, most of them are pretty small. That though, to maintain their particular national identity, their distinctive character, their distinctive statehood as European, well, you got to, keep a control of who comes in, and very very quickly it could change. And then he says, well, if it changes, then what are we going to do? Where, why do we have to be stuck with them? So there's long been the nightmare in Europe that one day somebody is going to enter the White House who is going to ask that very question: what the hell do we need this NATO alliance for? What does NATO do for us? What does NATO um, do to strengthen us? Now, whenever anyone says this, up goes the cry, oh, but when after 9/11, NATO invoked Article 5. NATO, was, joined the United States in going to war against, I don't know who, Afghanistan. Now, of course, NATO did nothing in Afghanistan. It was entirely kind of an American venture, and it was just because they invoked Article 5. Okay, fine, didn't cost them anything. Anyone was like, yeah, 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 put me down for Article 5. I'll take a couple of those. But they didn't do anything. So this has really been, again, really going back to the 1950s and John Foster Dulles and the agonizing reappraisal, and then we had the 1960s and all the concerns about nuclear weapons, and then the 1970s when you had this the Europeans were pursuing the kind of Ostpolitik, which the Americans were a little unhappy about, and then particularly when they started signing these gas deals with the Soviet Union, which the Americans were unhappy about. So we've gone through cycle after cycle of these rifts, transatlantic rifts, and then of course we had over Iraq and the differences over the French and the Germans were not going to go along with the Americans. But every time this happened, they would always make the they would kiss and make up, and that may well happen this time as well. But I think what's interesting, and I think what's a little distinctive about this crisis, is that this isn't even so much about policy. It partly is over Ukraine, but it's more about attitudes to life. It's about culture. It's about nationhood. You're saying, well, we don't really see the world in the same way. We have a different sense of history. We have a different set of values. And that's a much more dangerous. It's not like, well, we disagree on détente. You want to do this and we want to do that, or on the Middle East. We want to go into Iraq. You don't want to go into Iraq. You can just simply have those disagreements. But if it's more of a matter of we have different sets of values, we have different national cultures, then that could be quite the making of a serious break. Now, the problem, of course, is that Trump is only going to be there for another 3 years. He can't. There's not going to be another term. That this just ain't going to happen, and Trump knows it's not going to happen. So there's not going to be any re-election campaign on the part of Trump. So it's going to come to an end. And we'd have to think who is likely to prevail in 2028. I would think that as things stand, and of course it's a long way down the road, the Democrats are likely to win back the White House. I mean, American politics is very cyclical, and after Trump, there is going to be a reaction against Trumpism. I mean, it's invariably like that. There's always a reaction against the previous administration, just like after George W. Bush's wars, there was a reaction against that, and the public turned to Obama, though Obama didn't really change the policy very much, but rhetorically he did. He did institute some changes, and then of course after sort of the Obamaist globalism, then Trump came in 2016, and asserting national sovereignty, asserting America first, make America great again. So a reaction against the Obama globalism. So it's quite likely that when the Democrats return in 2028, then they're going to the will um, dismantle this Trumpian view. They will be campaigning in reaction against Trump, and their theme will be, well, our partners and allies, our partners and allies. We have to pay attention to our partners and allies. We the Europeans, they're our partners and allies. Ukraine's our partner and ally. Security of Ukraine is vital to American security. So they're going to roll out that familiar transatlantic blather, and so this whole thing may well just be ancient history. We're going to looking back, say 5 years from now, and you're saying, really, we took all this very seriously. I mean, if I was predicting, that's what I think will happen. But you never know. I mean, I would say it's always very difficult to shake the American system up. I mean, it's difficult to shake any political system up, but it is very difficult. There have been times in the past, that well, things are going to be different, but in no time at all, everything kind of reverts back to the familiar policies. Um, Somebody says here, I wouldn't count on a Democratic win for the White House in 2028. It's not like we've had 8 years of Republican. Um, well, look, I mean, I don't want to go around predicting anything. I mean, that's a long way down the road, and predicting is a fool's errand. But it, to say that we haven't had 8 years of Republican is a little that different because um, Trump has been dominating the political scene now since 2015. So by 2028, he will have dominated the political scene now for 13 years. So there will be a kind of exhaustion um, that somehow, we don't want any more Trump. So that's what that would work against J.D. Vance. Vance, well, we'll continue with with Trumpism. I think that might be, but it's not impossible. But that's why I think that it's not just, oh yes, it's been 4 years, but even during the Biden years, Trump was the dominant political figure. I mean, it was really, all the conversation was about Trump, and so the 2028 will be the first election since 2012, since the first election since 2012 that hasn't been dominated by Donald Trump. So that's going to be working against him. But now, it's true. Biden continued with some of Trump's policies, almost about the tariffs. He did continue with some of those policies, but he reversed a number of other policies, and in a significant way, in a very significant way, particularly on NATO, on Russia, on relations with Europe, and I think that reversal was a very significant one, because I think it led to the war in Ukraine. So it's true that on some of the economic policies, on tariffs, he continued with some of Trump's policies, but on the most important issue, which was transatlantic relations with Russia, on foreign policy, the whole demonization of countries, the good guys and the bad guys, democracies and autocracies. That was very much a reversal of Trumpism. Anyway, let's just go back to the to that document. Well, not the document, to the interview, the Politico interview, and then The political, yeah. So when it says, I think they're weak. I also think they want to be so politically correct. I think they don't know what to do. Europe doesn't know what to do. They don't know what to do on trade and so on. And then Burns says, it sounds like you want some pretty massive changes in Europe. And then says, well, look at Sweden. Sweden, known as the safest country in Europe, one of the safest countries in the world. Now it's known as very unsafe, pretty unsafe country. It's not even believable. And then Burns says, well, Sweden most recently joined NATO. And then your national security strategist says that if the US should work toward ending the perception and preventing the reality of NATO as a perpetually expanding alliance. And then he says, are there any countries who shouldn't be in the alliance? So here he kind of ducks the question. I remember back in 2017, I think Tucker Carlson asked him some question like that, and the question was about Montenegro. Do you think Montenegro should be in NATO? And he said, well, I don't know. These Montenegrins, they're pretty savage people. They could get us into a war. I mean, he didn't know anything about the Montenegrins, but he said, well, they're pretty savage people, and they could get us into a war. But here he's asked, well, what about Sweden? Do you think Sweden should be in NATO? Now, of course, the answer should have been no. I don't think Sweden should be in NATO. I think it's a threat to the United States because it's likely to get us into a war with Russia. Because it poses a threat to Russia, and it's just not a great idea. And Sweden was much better off during the Cold War, when at least it had a pro forma policy of neutrality. And Trump says, well, I mean, there are countries that are difficult for NATO, not that they shouldn't be. I think it's good to have them. Turkey is an example. This is Trump always does this. He doesn't answer the question, then he goes off on a kind of ramble on some other topic. Erdogan, Turkey is an example. Erdogan's a friend of mine. Whenever you have a problem with Erdogan, they ask me to call because they can't speak to him. He's a tough cookie. I actually like him a lot. I think actually, look, he's built a strong country, strong military, but they have a hard time dealing with him, and they ask me to call him, and I do call him, and I always work it out with him. He and I work it out right really quickly. We had some people that he released that were taken and going through years and years of court cases and everything else. And I said, got to release them, and he did. He's, very different. A lot of other leaders, and they have a hard time with him. But I shouldn't really have a hard time with him. So massively not answering her question about, do you think Sweden should not be in NATO? And Burns says, well, should NATO stop accepting new members? Should NATO end where it is now? Well, this is very important because, of course, both in the 28 point peace plan and in the national security strategy, it says there should be no longer any NATO expansion. That's a big step for the United States to take. No more NATO expansion. And so that was that was clearly obviously something that it was important for the Russians, but it's also important for the United States, which is that, hey, the more you expand, the more you get yourself tangled in all sorts of conflicts. I mean, there was, the founding fathers talked about no entangling alliances. They knew exactly what they were talking about, entangling alliances. You got an entangling alliance, then you're going to get yourself involved in other people's wars. And America was founded on the principle of not getting involved in other people's wars. We've got a nice country here, and, we're not going to go around the world looking for monsters to slay, as John Adams put it. No, we're not going to go around looking for monsters to slay. So anyway, so that was entirely in keeping with that principle, which is no more NATO expansion. That's so in the 28-point plan and in the national security strategy. it mentions no more NATO expansion. And so here she says, should NATO stop accepting new members? Should NATO end where it is now? And then Trump says, well, there aren't that many left when you get right down to it, right? There aren't that many left. I mean, it was always, long before Putin, it was an understanding that Ukraine should not be going into NATO. This should NATO stop accepting new members? Should NATO end where it is now? She again asked him. Well, there aren't that many left when you get down to it. There aren't that many left. It was always, long before Putin, it was an understanding Ukraine would not be going into NATO. This was long before Putin, in all fairness. And now they pushed, when Zelensky first went in and I first met Putin, he said, I want two things. I want Crimea back, and we're going to be a member of NATO. So this was long before Putin was, and now they pushed. When Zelensky first went in and first met Putin, he said, "I want two things back. I want Crimea back, and we're going to be a member of NATO." That wasn't quite the first thing that Zelensky did. Zelensky was seeking a reconciliation with Russia. He was seeking a peaceful resolution of the war in the Donbass initially. Then, of course, things change. But then it says he didn't say it in a very nice way either. He's a great salesman. I call him P.T. Barnum. You know who P.T. Barnum was, right? And says one of the greatest on earth. He could sell any product at any time. That was his expression. I can sell any product at any time. It was true. He said it doesn't matter whether it works or not. But he's P.T. Barnum. He's got a crooked Joe Biden to give him $350 billion, and look what it got him. But 25% of his country is missing. And then, in all fairness to Biden, Obama gave away Crimea, and she says, right, all that happened in 2014. And now he goes off into this very peculiar segue into Crimea. But just to conclude on that point, NATO, its very raison d'etre is to continue expanding. If it doesn't expand, then it dies. I mean, that's basically it. And so Ukraine is obviously, its prize, the prize that it's been seeking. It wants Ukraine in, but then of course even that it wouldn't stop at Ukraine. Because next up would obviously be they're trying to get Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina into NATO. That's in Europe. They would like to get Austria into NATO. I think they would like to get Switzerland. That's going to be a bit of a stretch, but they would love to get Switzerland into NATO. And then, of course, they would move into the Caucasus. Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, they want all of that in NATO. And then moving further east, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, all of that NATO wants to scoop up. So that's not for Trump to say, oh, well, there's not really much left. There's a lot left. I mean, NATO's ambitions are quite extensive, and they would like to bring all of those countries into the organization. But now he goes into this strange thing about Crimea. He then says, this is 2014, and Trump says, Obama, because Crimea was the heart. I'm a real estate person at heart, right? I'm very good at real estate. And when I looked, every time I look at the map, I say, oh, this Crimea is so beautiful, surrounded on all four sides by ocean. It's not the ocean, it's the Black Sea, but okay. It's only got a little piece of land to get to, to the main. Well, Crimea is massive, but it connects the parts of Ukraine that we talk about now. Through a small little jetty. It's four sides of oceans, the warmest part. It's got the best weather, best everything. And I know you are Ukrainian, you know Ukraine very well. And Obama forced them to give up Crimea. This is a very strange where he's getting this from. I mean, I understand he doesn't like Obama and he wants to blame everything on Obama, but it's hard to see how Obama forced anything on Crimea. I mean, Crimea could have gone to war with Russia in 2014 and say we're keeping Crimea. I mean, it would have been absolutely hammered by Russia. But what's that got to do with Obama? I mean, you can certainly say Obama instigated the coup. I mean, well, that's I mean, at least he took part in the coup, the coup that took place in Ukraine in 2014, which led to um, the Crimea essentially leaving Ukraine and joining Russia in response to the overthrow of Yanukovych. But that's not to say Obama forced them to give up Crimea. I remember when it happened, but I wasn't involved like I am now. To the knowledge that I have now, I have great knowledge of Ukraine now. I have great knowledge. No, I just from the standpoint of beauty, whether everything Crimea is the warmest, it's got such great potential, and Obama forced them. Obama did this. This is not Biden. Well, maybe he was involved, but I doubt it. He probably didn't know too much about then either. He was never the brightest bulb, but Obama gave away. He made them give it away. Obama didn't force anyone anything. Obama just made clear we're not going to go to war for Crimea, which is kind of what Trump would do it also in those circumstances, because you can't go to war for Crimea any more than Trump intends to go to war for the Donbass. I mean, he's not going to do it. And then, so Obama did the same thing. We're not going to do it. But Obama didn't force anyone. Ukraine was free to resist. But Obama wasn't going to start World War III with Russia over Crimea. And then anyway, Trump, they go national security strategy, and then Trump again. You have to understand. Here's my approach to Europe. I want to see a strong Europe. When they allow millions of people to pour into their countries, many of these people are committing tremendous crimes and so on. Again, to look at Sweden. I'm not looking at Sweden. I love Sweden. I love the people of Sweden. But they go from a crime-free country to a country that's a lot of crime. So, it's going back to the issue of immigration. Look at Germany. Germany was crime-free, and Angela made two big mistakes: immigration and energy. But those are two beauties. All right, so you basically get the sense of where Trump is coming from. He's basically he's absolutely sick to death of of the Europeans. He's really tired of this. The Europeans and Zelensky, and then in response to the Trumpian peace plan, they had that meeting. The meeting with in the E3, the E3, the E3 in Downing Street, and then they decided, well, we're going to have our own peace plan. We're going to submit this peace plan to Trump. And here then is this. The Europeans, back with their peace plan, and so here's the Washington Post story. Zelensky rules out ceding land to Russia, refusing to bow to Putin or Trump. Fantastic, and then it goes on. Under our laws, under international law, and under moral law, we have no right to give anything away, Zelensky said after meeting the top European leaders to discuss Trump's plan on Monday. This is what we are fighting for. The unequivocal declaration that Ukraine will not surrender land could mark the collapse of Trump's plan, which critics condemned as fulfilling a wish list of Russian President Putin. Yeah, critics, idiotic critics, but as we've mentioned earlier. But here you see the way the Post correctly formulates it. They say, well, this could mean the end of the Trump plan, which they think is fantastic. But it's only fantastic if you assume that Trump would just then shrug his shoulders and say, well, okay, I'm with you and I'll do whatever I can to help you. And then Zelensky, speaking to journalists aboard his flight to Brussels following consultations with the leaders of Britain, France, and Germany, made one of his clearest public statements yet on the emerging US backed proposal. He said the plan had been stripped of what he called explicitly anti Ukrainian provisions, suggesting that Kiev was open to a deal. No, it doesn't suggest Kiev was open to a deal. I mean, it's just stripped of anything that might make it acceptable to Russia. But he stood firm on the issue of land, a view shared by European leaders who have insisted that Putin should not be permitted to redraw international boundaries by force. Zelensky said Ukraine will not surrender territory in the East Donbass, not to hasten peace talk, not to satisfy Washington's push for compromise, and not under pressure from Moscow's continuing military onslaught. And then we have Ursula von der Leyen sends out this exuberant tweet. As peace talks are ongoing, the EU remains ironclad in its support for Ukraine. Our financing proposals are on the table. What she calls financing proposal, that's the theft of the Russian sovereign assets. The goal is a strong Ukraine on the battlefield and at the negotiating table. We reaffirmed to President Zelensky that the EU remains steadfast and committed to its principles. Ukraine's sovereignty must be respected. Ukraine's security must be guaranteed in the long term as a first line of defense for our union. I love this, the first line of defense. First line of defense against whom? I mean, so is that she's suggesting, of course, that that Russia is about to unleash its hordes against Europe? And then Macron, sent his stuff out, and again, just and lasting peace says that. How many times does it say it? Yeah, it says it twice in this tweet. In London, the E3 meeting with President Zelensky also helped move us forward to the path of a just and lasting peace. We will continue to coordinate closely with Ukraine and with the United States to strengthen our convergences. At the same time, we are preparing. Yes, that's it. I was waiting for that. Who's gonna be the first to say it? Robust security guarantees. It has to be robust. You can't have anything without having a robust as your adjective. Robust security guarantees and measures for Ukraine's reconstruction, which is basically theft of the assets. And then Bundeskanzler Friedrich Merz, Ukraine's fate is Europe's fate. We're here to see how we can step up our efforts. No one should have any doubt. Our support will not falter. And then we had the PM, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer's office sent out this. The leaders agreed that while diplomatic efforts continue, Europe must stand with Ukraine, strengthening its ability to defend against relentless attacks that have left thousands without heat or light. They also discussed positive progress made to use immobilized Russian sovereign assets. Oh, it's immobilized. I love this, just because they're immobile, so therefore, we can just do whatever we want with them. They're just immobile. I mean, they're not doing anything. They're just immobile. Immobilize sovereign assets to support Ukraine's reconstruction. Notice how they're using this word, Ukraine's reconstruction. What was the word that Macron used? Yes, also use the word Ukraine's reconstruction. Yeah. That's Ukraine's reconstruction. That money, the whole point of this getting their hands on these Russian sovereign assets is to spend it on military hardware. Exact opposite of reconstruction. You can't have reconstruction while there's a war on. And they intend to keep fighting that war. But they want to use it, we want to use this money for reconstruction. We want to build nice buildings. Following the meeting with the leaders of France, Germany, and Ukraine, the Prime Minister convened a call with European allies alongside President Zelensky to update them on the latest situation. The leaders all agreed that now is a critical moment and that we must continue to ramp up support to Ukraine and economic pressure on Putin to bring an end to this barbaric war. But what about aren't you going to push Putin to the negotiating table? They forgot that cliche. And then here's BBC. Ukraine prepares a new peace plan as Zelensky rules out giving up land. Ukraine is preparing to present a revised peace plan to the White House as it seeks to avoid making territorial concessions to Russia. Kiev is set to propose alternatives after President Zelensky again rolled out surrendering land, saying he had no right to do so under Ukrainian or international law. And then, this is after his meeting. And then at times, Ukraine to show U.S. new peace plan as land remains sticking point. And again, Ukraine will present a new peace plan to Washington as President Zelensky insisted that Kiev had no right to surrender, and so on. Speaking after hastily arranged talks with Ukraine's European allies, Zelensky said the new plan would be sent to the U.S. later on Tuesday. However, he indicated there was likely to be little, if any, progress on ending the almost 4-year war in the near future. Russia is insisting that we give up territories, but we don't want to cede anything. We have no legal right to do so under Ukrainian law, our constitution, and international law, and we don't have a moral right either. So that's it. So now that's the thrust of it. We're not going to give up anything, and we've got a new peace plan. Now, all of this is predicated on the getting their hands on this Russian money, because ultimately they can't really continue with this war. I mean, it's like, how are they going to get to pay for all this weaponry? They've already said we're not going to dip into our own national budgets. We're not going to issue any new euro bonds. So the only source of money is this, this whatever it is, 200 billion euros. And no one knows exactly the sums involved. But that's our only source of funding, because it's clear that Trump isn't prepared to spend any American money. I mean, he can certainly sell American hardware to the Europeans, and then they can just give that to Zelensky. But Trump isn't going to do any more. He's not going to give it for free. There's no. I mean, that's not going to happen. There's no more weapons for free. And so all of these plans. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. It all goes back to the same thing, and that's what you can even see in all these messages. It all goes back to the same thing. We got to get our hands on this money, this pot of gold, and so that's really the source. And somebody says here, which I like, NATO should be shut down permanently. Well, that's of course that's where the inexorable logic leads, and of course the inexorable logic should lead Trump precisely to that conclusion. Hey, I came up with a peace plan. Europeans said they're not interested. Zelensky says he's not interested. The Russians are probably not interested, but they haven't explicitly told us that they're not interested. Well, I don't want to do this anymore. I did all this. They want to go on fighting. I said, okay, they can go on fighting, but it's not going to have anything. I'm not going to go spending any more money on this. I'm not going to spend any more time or energy on this. Let them go on fighting. But don't try to suck us into your war. And that would essentially put pay to NATO, because then once you take that position, then the next logical step would be, well, what do we need this military alliance for? I mean, this makes really absolutely no sense at all on any level. This is an alliance that should a long time ago have been dissolved. There's no reason to have these kinds of this ridiculous transatlantic, gigantic military alliances. They make no sense whatsoever. And no one has ever had anything like that. Um, and by its very existence, by its continuing expansion, it's just making the world, every moment a more dangerous place. And then, therefore, you should start thinking about the United States withdrawing from NATO. Now, that isn't going to happen overnight because there's so many vested interests in the United States to keep this alliance going that that I mean, you probably you're only going to get about two votes, in the Senate in favor of withdrawing from the alliance. So you've got to start laying the foundations and saying that this makes no sense at all for the United States, and we've got to start thinking seriously about what um, America's strategic interests are. And I think when they're saying, as in that strategic national security strategy, which is that, hey, the Western Hemisphere is far more important to us than Ukraine is. And anyway, let's now go to our locals page and address some of the comments and questions from the Gagglers, the people who try to keep the dogs reasonably content, sort of, well, at least, that they feel appreciated. They often don't feel appreciated, rewarded. So really, really grateful to all of our Gaggle community. Really, thank you so much for your all of your contributions. And here we have. So let me see. The first question is, excellently, from Cynthia. Cynthia, as you all know, is a film scholar extraordinaire with her encyclopedic knowledge of cinema, and every week she indulges us with a great deal of fascinating information about films, about the history of films, and about everything that goes into the making of the films that we screen on Monday, and of course then they're posted on our board and they're available for all gagglers to enjoy forever. And so it makes, because her comments are so interesting and so fascinating, so informative, it means that we gagglers have a rare treat, watching a very good movie and to enjoy Cynthia's really, really informed and fascinating commentary. So yesterday we screened a film from 1981, Mephisto, based on the novel of Klaus Mann, and directed by István Szabó, Hungarian film director, and of course starring Klaus Maria Brandau. Very good film, very interesting film. So please, as I say, take a look at the film, and as you do so, read Cynthia's really, really interesting commentary. Anyway, Cynthia says, this. She's talking about the film. She says Hendrik, who's the hero of the film, played by Brandau. Hendrik said to his haute bourgeoisie wife Barbara, played by Christine Yanda, "I'm sure you could even excuse fascist terrorism. Your liberalism might even get used to dictatorship." Is the most thought-provoking quote in the film, in my opinion. That's because it implies that liberalism can devolve into a hegemonic dictatorship, just as Nazism did. So, is it possible either of the liberal parties at the same time, the German Democratic Party or the German People's Party, could have also developed into hegemonic dictatorship? Um, that's so interesting. I didn't take his comment in that way. So when he made that comment to her, he was still sort of a figure on the left, the political left. He was involved with the workers' theater, and so he was kind of doing this Brechtian theater and trying to bring art to the masses. So this like as part of agitprop. Trying to whip up the masses into being anti-capitalist. The kind of leftish communist theater of that time, and so that he was involved in all of that during the early days. That was before the Nazis came to power. So when he said that to her, he was more or less saying like, well, that you don't um, you're not as opposed to the Nazis as we are. You're not willing to fight against the Nazis as we are. And he was more. I thought the way he was saying it is that your liberalism might even get used to dictatorship means that, well, you're so unwilling to get your hands dirty. You're so unwilling really to take a stand. You're trying to be so even-handed and so balanced in your view that you're the one who's going to make peace with the Nazis, because you'll say, well, okay, they've got their view and the opponents have their view, but we don't really want to get our hands dirty. We don't want to take the fight against the Nazis. So it's like, I think he was criticizing liberalism as being just too even-handed. That you're not really able to take a stand against Hitler and the Nazis. That's how I understood it. And what was interesting about that comment was precisely that he changed so drastically. I mean, so at that moment, he's the figure on the left. He thinks we should resist Nazism, and he was berating his wife that she was insufficiently anti-Nazi. She was, she wasn't willing to fight. That she comes from this, as you say, haute bourgeois family. She has money and comforts and enjoys a good life, and so she doesn't really want to get her hands dirty. And so she's trying to be, too even-handed, as if you can in any way compromise with the Nazis. So remember, because he was a figure on the left at that time, he was on the Nazi blacklist. And that's why you remember when Hitler does come to power, and I think she tells him, you have to leave the country. You are on their blacklist. So why is he on their blacklist? Because he did all this communist theater. And it comes up again and again later on in the film. Even the Goering character says, well, you were doing this communist theater. How can you do these disgusting things? So that's what he was. He was this communist. He wasn't a communist himself, but he was working with the communists. So he was attacking her in a way from the left. We are fighting Hitler, but you are not. But that's the irony, of course, is that he then makes his peace with the Nazis, and she's the one who leaves the country and lives in Paris, or at least there she lives in Paris. I mean, I assume once the once the Nazi. I mean, the book was written in 1936, so this was long before the war and long before the defeat of France, obviously, and therefore long before the occupation of Paris by the Germans. So at that moment, she was just living in Paris, but she did make a stand against the Nazis. She left the country, but he made his peace. And remember, when he made his peace, it was predicated on the Nazis excusing him. They excused him. Okay, we accept your apologies for your youthful indiscretions. We accept that. Okay. We saw that you were working with this proletarian theater, that you were working with these Bertolt Brecht types, But now we accept your apology, and you've now seen the errors of your ways, and you're willing to work with us. So he went along with it. Yeah, yeah, I'll work with you. And she's the one who went off and left Germany. So it's the irony of how the two positions reversed. And then anyway, Cynthia then goes on. After Hendrik insults the National Socialist leaders, the general's girlfriend, the National Socialist, yeah, the actor and the National Socialist, the general's girlfriend, Lotte Lindenthal, by calling her a stupid cow. Hans Miklos, played by Hungarian actor, blah, blah, angrily responds, apparently, I'm the only one here with a spark of honor left. Nobody in this Jew ridden business cares if a lady is insulted. Yes. So, was it true the theater scene in Hamburg was owned and controlled by the Jews? If so, did this hold true of the theater scene in Berlin as well? I wouldn't have said it was owned, and I mean they were very influential. I mean, you remember we did Kurt Weill. We covered the Weill was Jewish. On the other hand, Bertolt Brecht wasn't Jewish. So I think there were indeed a lot of Jews in the world of theater, but I wouldn't have said it was it was controlled by them. But keep in mind also, these Jews were very much um, secular Jews. I mean, they were secular, so they didn't practice Judaism. They didn't do anything. They didn't go to synagogue or anything like that. And they certainly were not Zionists. So they just happened to be Jews. But as I say, the leading figure there was, of course, Bertolt Brecht, and he wasn't Jewish. But yeah, I mean, look, I mean, this guy was a Nazi, and he was obviously throwing around insults about these Jew-ridden business. And well, I mean, I think pretty much anywhere, the world of art and entertainment, there was extensive influence. There's no question. In every country, the world of art and entertainment, has a serious preponderance of Jews in them. But I mean, I don't think there was I mean, it was the Nazis made this a big issue, but I mean, this proletarian theater, this communist theater, that was anything but somehow pro Jewish. I mean, they were just simply. I mean, Jews obviously were heavily involved in various radical movements, but by no means it was predominant in Germany. Because, as I say, the leader of all of them was Brecht, and he wasn't Jewish. But I mean, arts and entertainment, had its substantial preponderance of Jews in them in Germany as elsewhere. And then anyway, Cynthia then goes on. The general first made a remark to Hendrik about him having a limp handshake, yes, suggesting he may indeed be queer. Later on, he asked Hendrik about his time in Hamburg, suggesting that the town is sissified, if not downright queer. He then puffed up his chest and proudly said something along the lines of Berlin is town for manly men. So is there any truth that either about Hamburg and Berlin at the time? Or is all of that just steeped in mythical stereotyping with no grounds in reality? Well, I think that the theater world, there was a just as with the Jews, there was a substantial proportion of them were indeed homosexual, and this general would indeed look upon Hendrik as quite likely, quite possibly homosexual. And he kind of minced around a lot. I mean, particularly in the early parts of the film, he was often just mincing around in a somewhat effeminate way, and you could see why the general would think that he might be homosexual. But as far as I would imagine, as far as the general was concerned, he may well have assumed, yeah, he's homosexual. But what would have been required of him was to keep this hidden. So he'd be all for, yeah, he's married, so he's got a wife, and that means that's okay. So it's all of this is hidden from view. But the Nazis had they had their own homosexuality problem. Of course, the SA, Ernst Röhm, and all the people who founded the SA, they were homosexual. And keep in mind, not only were the leaders of the SA homosexual, they were actually quite close to Hitler. I mean, Rome and Hitler really were the founders of the Nazi Party. Hitler was Rome's protege, and Hitler apparently didn't have any real problems with Rome's open homosexuality. So, and I think it was interesting also in the film, the actor who played the kind of Goering-like figure was himself rather effeminate. I mean, he was like, he had a very soft, effeminate face and a rather soft, effeminate manner. He tried to cover it up again by having a very attractive girlfriend. And then you remember the scene where he grabs a tankard of beer and drinks it down, just to show what a manly man he was. But if you looked at him and the way he was, he carried himself, and particularly his kind of closeness. He wants to spend entire evenings chatting with Hendrik. I mean, they're sitting there, just physically close to one another and just chatting together. I mean, there's at least questions about him as to whether he may at the very least have been a closet homosexual. So I think that it may have been his telling Hendrik, hey, yeah, if you want to be a part of us, you need to at least outwardly be a little bit more manly. And that's what outwardly you want to be a little bit less with the limp handshake and a little bit less of the effeminate prancing around. But as I say, if you look at him, he didn't exactly convey. The general didn't exactly convey kind of great manliness. Um, but yeah, of course, the theater world was, in Germany, was indeed rife with homosexuals. And then Cynthia goes on, as evidenced by the screenshot below, Hans Miklas had come to fully embrace the Nazi ideology and culture, and he most likely started out as a member of either the Communist Party or the Social Democratic Party. Then he sometimes got duped into joining the National Socialist. How commonly did that happen to others like him at the time? And were many of them also killed by the Nazis for protesting against them? I did find that part very surprising. I mean, I think that, yeah, absolutely, there were people who had joined the Communist Party and then switched over to the Nazis once it became apparent that the communists were unlikely to win out, that the Nazis were likely to prevail in Germany. I think people, for opportunistic reasons, they go with the winning team, and so they switched over. So I think that was quite common. I didn't find it at all plausible that he would be arrested and executed. I didn't get that. I didn't understand it, because once you're in the Nazis, you were one of the Nazis, and there wasn't really, they didn't really execute their own. They there was the executions, the Night of the Long Knives, which was June 30th, 1934, when Hitler um, basically eliminated the SA. Now it's possible that arrest and but I don't think so. That I don't think that had anything to do with the SA, because the attack on the SA was not provoked. I mean, here this guy Miklas was trying to circulate some kind of a petition and so on. So this had nothing to do with the SA. Hitler just unleashed that terror against the SA without without any real provoking cause. He just simply unleashed it, and that's why Rome and the rest of them were surprised by this. They weren't expecting this onslaught, whereas here he was expecting this attack against it. But it wasn't at all clear. In the film, it's not clear why. What had he done? Why had he turned against the Nazis? I mean, he just suddenly, because he'd been in the Nazis, and so at what point did he suddenly turn against them? So it may be that this film is already very long. Maybe in the original, you know, the original cut, it was made a little bit clearer why he suddenly turned against the Nazis, and why did they execute him? Maybe why couldn't they just simply do what they did with a lot of other people, just shove him into a camp, or shove him into a labor camp? I mean, executing him was quite brutal. I mean, it was the purge of Rome, the Rome purge and the SA. That was very brutal. Yeah, that was just simply mass killings. But after that, people were just mostly sent to a labor camp. I mean, they wouldn't necessarily have been executed. So that just wasn't at all clear in the film why and how that happened. Okay, so so I want to just then comment about the film, which is a very interesting film, but there's an aspect of it that remains a little bit unsatisfying. Is that, or this Hedrick is presented as, or he sells out, makes peace with the Nazi regime. More than makes peace, he accepts their honors, and then heads the National Theater, and so on and so forth. The problem is, this book is written by Klaus Mann. Now, Klaus is obviously the son of Thomas Mann. Mann was, in 1933, when Hitler came to power, Mann was an internationally renowned author. Not only was he an internationally renowned author, his book sold. He was a commercially successful author, and he was a Nobel laureate. He had already won the Nobel Prize for Literature for his book Joseph and His Brothers. So Mann can up and leave Germany in 1933. He went to the United States, and he took his very large family with him, including, of course, Klaus. And of course, his brother Heinrich, his older brother Heinrich, who of course who was also a writer, but wasn't as successful as Thomas was. So he was able to support this very substantial family because of his earnings. Now, most figures in the arts in Germany really didn't have that option. I mean, well, first of all, you have the issue of language. I mean, how good was their English? But it's not an easy thing to do, just to up and leave, and then you go and make money in another country. And particularly if you're an actor. Well, let's say you learn English. Okay, then okay, you can go to Hollywood. And if you're speaking English with a thick German accent, then the parts you're able to get are pretty limited. You're not going to be playing Hamlet speaking with a German accent. You're not going to be playing Othello with a German accent. You're going to be playing evil Nazis because you speak English with a thick German accent. So that's why you have somebody like um, Conrad Veidt, who of course was anti-Nazi. He left Germany because he was an anti-Nazi. Then he went to Hollywood, and then he spent his time in Hollywood playing Nazis because well that's the work that you get. And of course he was Conrad Veidt. His most memorable role was in Casablanca as Colonel Strasser. And but when you think of him, well, the evil Nazi, but of course, yeah, played by an actor who was anti-Nazi. So your options are always very limited. Now it's very easy for Klaus Mann, who basically glided by, living off his father. Now he did publish some things. He did publish novels. He did some journalism. But ultimately, I mean, he survived because of his father. So he, moved in the kind of literary intellectual circles because of his father. He started a magazine because of his father, and then if things got bad for him, he was suddenly in that financial troubles. Then he could always go and move back in his father's house in the Pacific Palisades. So what I'm saying is that it's easy for someone on the outside to take a very judgmental view of someone who, in the inside, who's forced to live in Germany, who doesn't have the option of going live somewhere else, morally compromising himself. I mean, Klaus didn't have to do that. Klaus could just up and leave. And as we see his life. His life really was not exactly a very happy and fruitful one. Either he committed suicide or he died of a drug overdose. I mean, I think it seems a little unclear which it was. But obviously, he had quite an unhappy life. Upping and leaving Germany. So, I mean, I'm not in any way, not knocking the book or knocking the film, but I do think that there's always, people compromise because they really don't have that much choice. I mean, that's that a Thomas Mann does have a choice, but most figures in the arts, particularly in the theater and the literary artistic world, they really didn't have the stature of Thomas Mann, and therefore they have to find ways to compromise. And he himself, Hedrick, wasn't such a bad guy. I mean, he did make an effort to help out his friends, the people, who were kicked out for being Jewish, or mixed or whatever, not entirely Aryan purity. He did try to step in and save them, not successfully, obviously, but he did at least try. He got his girlfriend out of the country, which he managed to get the Nazis to allow her to leave the country. So he wasn't a really bad person. He did show that he had some human instincts, but but there's no question he was tempted by money and power and all those other things. That's inevitable. But I'm just saying that one should always keep in mind that it's it's not always easy to make the right moral choices. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. And then here we have okay, so yeah, so that was that. Then we have we have the great photograph of Hillary and the horrific Madeleine Albright. And then Anne Marie, thank you so much, Anne Marie. It's really generous of you. Anne Marie is a renowned musical expert, a renowned musical performer. Was plays in the most outstanding orchestras in the world. Works with some of the most distinguished conductors and composers, and recently was working on the magic flute, and we're always very fortunate to have her really fascinating and learned and informative commentary on music on our pages. We're very privileged to have that, and she's really just put made some fascinating contributions, which I intend to respond to. She wrote about Alban Berg, that I think was really interesting. That because we had on our music club, we had the Alban Berg's lyric suite, and then Anne Marie then wrote a really interesting, intriguing commentary on that lyric suite, and particularly about how, which I'd never really thought about, that somehow playing Alban Berg is actually maybe more rewarding than listening to him, which I think is a really interesting comment. But anyway, she's got a really lot of fascinating insights um, on the pieces of music that we post here, and I intend to respond to them because they're so stimulating, and I want to address her observations. But anyway, Anne Marie is we're very fortunate to have her here. Somebody who understands music as an outstanding, world-renowned performer, and that is something. So I feel always very envious, and well, envious is no, that's not a nice word. I mean, I I wish that I had that talent, but thank you. To have her here is the next best thing. So thank you so much, Anne Marie. Um, and then we have Robert, who says, thank you so much, Robert, for your generosity. Robert says, the other day you mentioned Honecker. Yes, the Honecker, who is Walter Ulbricht's successor as the leader of the DDR. Anyway, says the other day you mentioned Honecker. Now, isn't it unsettling that Chancellor Merz has filed around 5,000 Yeah, I read that as well. He has filed around 5,000 criminal complaints over online insults. Doesn't this echo the old Honecker era pattern of treating political criticism as a police matter and suggest a regression towards speech policing Germany vowed never to repeat? You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. I was really shocked when I read just that Merz has filed around 5,000 criminal complaints over online insults. I mean, the idea that you can actually, this is a police matter, when you say mean things about a political figure, that it really is quite, and it's just quite stunning. And you're absolutely right. See, what the Germans have done is when they say never again, they mean, never again Hitler. Well, anyone can say that. Well, of course, Hitler, that's over and done with. He himself is a totally discredited figure. His movement, totally discredited. No one's going to come along and say, oh, yeah, I love Hitler. I want to revive the Nazi party. That's gone. That's so that's an easy one. But never again means, never again using the power of the state to punish and imprison political opponents for speech. Speech is speech. It's something that's peaceful. It's peaceful opposition. But the Germans absolutely, don't, do not think along those lines. They just think it's enough to say, no more Hitler, and then you can then carry on and start shoving people into prison. Because if as long as we're not doing it in the name of Hitler, then that's fine. We can just go ahead and do that. I mean, in a way, it's the same with their absolutely disgusting policy on Israel and Palestine. And so, well, we have a special obligation? Or what's the special obligation? Oh, we have a special obligation because of the Jews, what we did to the Jews. So therefore, we give a blank check to Israel. Well, if you say, well, no, you have a special obligation, it's nothing to do with Israel. You have a special obligation to make sure that people are not treated cruelly and inhumanely, and that people are not treated like as subhumans who don't deserve any mercy, any respect. That's your obligation. That you don't dehumanize an entire group of people. But they don't see it like that. They say, "Oh, no, that's fine." Our particular obligation only comes around because, hey, because the Jews. Okay, so because we have we did this thing with the Jews. Therefore, the conclusion we draw is that we should provide Israel with whatever it wants, use whatever weapons it wants in order to crush those who are against Israel. So this is the way they operate. So okay, the alternative for Deutschland. Okay, well that's now the leading party in Germany. Okay, so we have a special obligation. Yeah, Hitler and the Nazis, the AfD. Why don't we just call the AfD, which is now more popular than we are? Why don't we just call the AfD Hitler and the Nazis, and that way we can just simply lock them up and outlaw the party altogether. Well, that's a bloody good idea. And that just shows how we're democratic we are. It just shows, that we have learned the lessons of history. We just simply tar a political party with Hitler and Nazi, and then we shove them in prison. And that just shows how much we've distanced ourselves from the Nazis. It's completely phony, totally bogus, and it just shows that they have not learned from history. They've just very tendentiously used history in a very opportunistic way to go after their political opponents. The same goes incidentally with Russia. How do they justify essentially sending lethal weapons to Ukraine to fight Russia? Oh, we have a special obligation. Special obligation to whom? Oh, special obligations to Ukraine. It's our special obligation because Ukrainians lost a lot of lives when we invaded. Yeah, but Russians lost a lot of lives as well when you invaded. How is your special obligation fulfilled by sending weapons into a war zone that you devastated 80 years ago? That somehow that you're extirpating your feelings of guilt by returning to your scene of crime and continuing your crime. So rather than saying, well, we have a special obligation, therefore we will do everything we can to further peace. Therefore, we will do everything we can to ensure that we don't use violence, or we don't sponsor violence, or we don't encourage violence. No, that's not the way. Our special obligation is that we can go back to killing Russians. But we can say, oh, we're killing Russians because we have a special obligation to protect Ukrainians. So that's our expiation of our feelings of guilt. I mean, it's so dishonest. It's almost unbelievable. And and they haven't yet made the decision to send the Taurus missiles, even though Merz has said that he intends to send the missiles, but he's had second thoughts about that. He hasn't yet gone as far as that, but he still thinks to think, oh yeah, because a special obligation, because of World War II, so we can send our missiles just to show how good we are. We're helping Ukraine. That just shows how good we are, how we've learned our lesson from World War II. It's breathtaking in its insolence. It's insulting in their thorough dishonesty. So this is entirely of a piece. Oh, these criminal complaints, and then they turn around. Schmerz says, if you don't need any lectures from America about freedom and democracy, well, you obviously do. You obviously do. I mean, if you think that you can criminalize people's comments, I mean, criminalize. Yeah, he says something insulting. Yeah, that's exactly what democracy is. You're supposed to say if you say something insulting, that's it. That's freedom of speech. Like it's all about people saying mean things about you, the things that you don't like to hear, maybe even painful to hear. But that's part of free speech. No, 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 no. We have a special obligation. Yeah, we have a special obligation. Because we can Hitler, so we can outlaw political parties, and we can outlaw people who have views that we don't like because of our special obligation, because of the Nazi era. That's it. So you can justify anything by just saying we have a special obligation to Nazi era. Anyway, Robert, thank you so much. Hope things are going things are going well in New Jersey. Anyway, here's Marty with a picture of let me see. Oh, this is an interesting picture. So this is a handshake between Macron and Starmer, but for some reason, somebody maybe explain the reason. Macron has his left hand on on Starmer's right knee. There must be a good reason why Macron has his left hand on Starmer's knee, but I guess that with the knee, somebody might can explain this. And then here's there's a picture here. This is young. This is kind of young Macron shaking hands with Trump. Trump not really, looking. Um, they've had these handshakes in the past where they use these handshakes, Trump and Macron, as a kind of a power play, whereby they keep Trump keeps shaking Macron's hand, and then Trump doesn't let go. So Macron keeps trying to pull his hand away, but Trump just won't let go of his hand. So it's a power play. They do this routinely. Macron's obviously very unhappy, but just Trump will not let go of his hand, and he keeps pulling him in, using that handshake in order to uh, pull Macron in. And then Marty then has another picture of uh, Zelensky issuing his hand, and then Orban looking at that hand and almost like asking, "I know you just went to the toilet. Did you make sure that you washed your hands afterwards?" Because that he just looks at that hand as if, I'm not sure that hand has been washed, and I don't like where that hand has been. It's it's a great look. It's a great photograph. Yeah, the Carlos says, yeah, great pics. And where oh yeah, it was. And then Robert says, Gert Frobe, the German actor who played Goldfinger. Well, the very interesting thing is that it's a German actor who played Goldfinger, but in the film, he's supposed to be an Englishman. That's the peculiarity, because he's obviously German. He looks German. He sounds German. His whole bearing is German. But somehow Goldfinger is supposed to be an Englishman. Anyway, Gert Frobe, the German actor who played Goldfinger, barely spoke English during filming. His entire performance was dubbed in post production by an English voice actor. I didn't know that, but the English voice actor still sounded like German. He didn't sound like an Englishman. Um, a rare case where the villain's iconic presence and the voice audience remember come from two different people. That's very interesting, because, as I say, he looked very German, and the voice was indeed, yes, he spoke English perfectly, but with a German accent, or at least German intonations. He didn't sound like an Englishman. Um, This he's famous when Bond asks when he has that whole laser beam is about to be killed with this with the laser beam. Do you expect me to talk? No, Mister Bond. I expect you to die. It sounds like a German saying, "No, Mister Bond," with impeccable politeness. No, Mister Bond. I expect you to die. Um, yeah, but he was a good he was a good villain. No question, he was a very good villain. There's then Marty has a picture of Schmerz, who's just come back from Israel, and he was at the Wailing Wall, and of course he's wearing the yarmulke. Um, it says and he's weeping. He's weeping, presumably about the horror of the Holocaust. And so he goes there. It's so repulsive. It's just absolutely repulsive when you get these German leaders who think that all they need to do when they go to Israel is weep and wail and talk about the Holocaust this, the Holocaust that, without saying, okay, um, does that mean that you can justify mass slaughter of people who had nothing whatever to do with the Holocaust? What did the Palestinians have to do with the Holocaust? Nothing. They're suffering. They're made to suffer because of the Holocaust. They're the main victims of the Holocaust. So because the mass exodus of Jews from Germany went to Palestine and displaced the local population, and then the Germans who sent money, a lot of money after World War II for Israel to allow Israel to establish itself in Palestine. That all came from Germany. So the Palestinians are the ones who have suffered most because of the Germans. But he said, oh, no, no, the Holocaust. We have a special obligation. Yeah, like Amanda J.K. says, the living Palestinians are Holocaust survivors. You're absolutely right. That's absolutely right. Historically, I mean, this isn't just, this is another Holocaust or whatever. No, historically, that is absolutely correct. They are the victims of the Holocaust. They had nothing to do with it, but they're the ones who have been paying the price for the Holocaust. Anyway, my time is up. Thank you so much, everybody who contributed, who asked really interesting questions, really intriguing questions, made a lot of fascinating comments, and above all, the people who very generously contributed to the tip jar. The dogs, they're going to check the tip jar, and then you say, hey, the tip jar, I can tip it because it's so light, and then they turn around and accuse me of God knows what, but they're not happy with me. But that's my lot in life. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you for joining me. We'll be back on Thursday, and same time. I hope to see you all then. Until then, all the best. Good night. Bye bye.